Hi, this is Mr. Den again, and we're going to start the next unit and learn about the Congress of the United States, the power and organization of the House of Representatives and the Senate. You need to take notes during this, and you probably are going to have to watch this a couple of times just to make sure you get all the information that you need. So you have to work particularly hard and pay particular attention and learn this, master this content. So let's begin. So let's just take a quick little multiple choice question. Congress is organized into A, unicameral, B, bifurcated, C, bicameral, or executive, legislative, and judicial branches. And of course we know the answer is C, bicameral legislature. So let's talk about one of those houses, the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives organization is broke down into 2-year terms in odd number years starting in January. So this fall, every single House of Representatives congressperson will be up for election. Whoever wins that election will start their term next January of 2013 and will run for 2 years to 2015. They will serve 2 sessions in Congress in the beginning of 2013 and the beginning of 2014. If there's a significant need, the President may call a special session if Congress is adjourned and the President believes that there's sufficient requirement for them to call them back to make a decision, such as to declare war. There are 435 members in the House of Representatives. Each one of those members represents a single district. There is no shared representation in the House of Representatives. One congressperson to one district, based on population. Minnesota currently has 8 congresspersons. The amount of representation by state, as we know from the Virginia plan, is based on population. And the U.S. Census, by the Constitution, determines our population every 10 years. We count every person in the United States, and we try to figure out where they live by state. Depending upon where that population distribution falls will determine how many representatives each state gets. Once that census is taken, each state will then be allocated the number of representatives based on its population. Those 435 members, the total number never changes. However, the distribution of those 435 members may change based on population. Once that determination is made, for example, in Minnesota we have 8, we have to look to make sure that every district has the same number of people in it. So all 435 districts have the same number of people. That will require moving the lines every 10 years, and this is called redistricting. Now, if you redistrict to make those districts have the same number of people, but you do it in order to take advantage politically, that's called gerrymandering, and that's illegal. Now, it's difficult to prove gerrymandering unless there's some very obvious boundary shapes that look, that are clearly done in order to take advantage of, to give a party a political advantage. But nevertheless, it still happens. What about qualifications for the House of Representatives? Let's take another little quick quiz. Do you have to be 25 years old? Do you have to be a U.S. citizen for 5 years? And do you have to live in the state that you represent? Well, we know that the answer is C. 25 years old and live in the state you represent, but you have to be a citizen for 7 years, not 5. We do know that it's 2-year terms. But what about the Senate? Well, in the Senate, you have to be older, 30 years old. You have to be a citizen longer for 9 years. As the representatives, the congresspersons, you have to live in the state you represent. But the organization and rules of the Senate are different. Of course, we know that there are 2 senators for each state, which means there's a total number of 100. And the only way that can change is if we add more states. They're 6-year terms, so they're 3 times longer than the House of Representatives. And those senators share representation of their state. So they're called at-large representatives as compared to single district representatives. Well, let's talk about some of the privileges of the House and Senate. What is the franking privilege? Franking privilege, is it the right of congressmen to be frank when speaking on the floor? Does it mean there's free stationery and postage? Does it mean they're protected from arrest? Or does it mean that they have an expense account for meals and transportation? Whoops. And we know that the franking privilege is B, free stationery and postage. The constituents of the members of the House and Senate, or the people that voted them in, have the right to be informed about what their congressmen and senators are doing. And in order to do that, they can send free, postage-free literature to their constituents to let them know about what's going on. What about control of House and Senate membership? What if you do something wrong as a senator or a congressperson, or your behavior is bad? Well, if you do something extremely bad, you can be expelled by 2/3 of a vote. But if you just do something that's minor but still poor behavior, either the House or Senate can censor you, which is a simple majority vote that formally disapproves or scolds you for doing something wrong. This can still be serious, as it is something that can be used against you in your next election. We're going to skip this slide. Now, why do incumbents usually win re-election? Well, because they're known, and because incumbents usually win, they can get money easier. And we know, even though it's illegal, those borders can be moved, and it's hard to prove. It might help them when they come to re-election how the districts are organized. And of course, since they've been in office for a while, they're better known to voters, and they have solved problems for their constituents. So because they've solved problems for their constituents, most voters believe that their incumbents best represent their views. Now, incumbency is more of an advantage for members of the House than it is for the Senate. If you're having to represent all the members of a state, from iron miners in the northern part of Minnesota to wheat farmers in southwestern Minnesota, it's difficult to convince all the members of the state that you're the best senator, because how do you represent the needs of all Minnesotans? So it's a little harder to get reelected as a senator. Because single districts in the U.S. House of Representatives are smaller, and you only have one person representing you in that district, single district representation, their reelection odds are much better. So let's go back to the House leadership. In the Constitution, it says that the leader of the House of Representatives is the Speaker of the House, and it comes from the majority party. So whoever's in charge of the House gets to have the Speaker of the House, and it's a very powerful position. It's third in line to the presidency after the Vice President. The majority leader is the floor leader from the same party, and they help to make sure that the members follow their party line. Of course, the minority leader, the leader of the party that's not in the majority, is the leader of their group, and if they somehow win the majority in the House, then they would take over the Speaker position. And both parties have party whips that just help the majority and minority leaders keep their members in line. What about lawmaking in the House? The House has a Rules Committee, the Senate does not. And because they have a Rules Committee, it's very important because it changes how bills will go through the House. The House Rules Committee decides how and when bills will be discussed. There's a lot of battles here, and because they can decide how long a bill will be debated on the floor, there is no filibustering in the House of Representatives. They can't use that tactic. Now, whenever you try to pass a bill, you need a quorum, which simply means you need to have half of that chamber of Congress present to do business. No sense in having a vote if you don't have enough people there to pass it, if everybody votes for it. So a minimum of 218 representatives need to be present. 218 of 435 is half. Let's talk about control or leadership in the Senate. Let's take a quiz. The official leader of the Senate is A, the majority leader, B, the Speaker of the House, C, the President pro temp, or D, the Vice President. The answer is, of course, D. The official leader of the Senate is the Vice President. However, the person that runs the Senate floor and runs the meetings is the President pro temp. The only time the Vice President shows up as the official leader of the Senate usually is to break a tie. Most of the time, the Vice President does not run the meetings, does not run the floor of the Senate. Another difference in the Senate is because they don't have a Rules Committee, usually there can be unlimited debate. And because of that, bills can be stalled because of a filibuster or that delay tactic. And you all remember probably Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington in his famous filibuster. Individuals can try to delay it, but because an individual cannot go on forever, usually it takes more than one member to have an effective filibuster. However, Strom Thurmond once spoke for over 24 hours against a bill in 1957, but of course, one person can't keep it up. You can end a filibuster by a vote of cloture, and a vote of cloture means that you need at least 60 votes in order to stop a filibuster. Now, each group has congressional committees, both the House and the Senate. And those committees that are permanent are called standing committees. They're always there because you usually need somebody like for agriculture, for example, maybe the Senate Foreign Arms Committee or the Congress about the different armed forces, Education Committee. And the standing committees have oftentimes subcommittees that help to break down the bill, to look at the bills as they break them down. There are also something called select committees. Those committees are not permanent, they're temporary, and are usually there simply to study and report on a specific issue or concern. Now, there are different types of joint committees, and we talked about the select because that's temporary and just investigative. But the more common one, or another common one, is the conference committee. Now, if you have similar bills that come and are passed from the House and the Senate and need to have their differences resolved, there will be members from both the House and the Senate that will come together in a conference to try to resolve the differences between the two versions of the bill to create one version. And of course, once that happens, they'll have to go back and vote on that new version again. And if they can agree, the House and the Senate both on the same version, it would then go on to the President for his signature or veto. What are the constitutional powers of Congress? Well, we've already talked about the expressed or enumerated powers. Those are the ones that Congress has specifically gotten from the Constitution. Enumerated powers, like to declare war or collect taxes. Those are specific powers, but we also know from last unit that there are implied powers that are necessary and proper to do what's important to keep the country going. That's the elastic clause. It expands the power of the President, or excuse me, of Congress to meet the needs of the nation. We also have already learned about the denied powers of Congress. The Bill of Rights limits the powers of Congress. Habeas corpus is required. You have to tell a person why you're putting them in jail. You can't have bills of attainder to make people guilty without a trial. And you can't go back and make somebody guilty of a crime that was previously committed before the law was passed. Congress also has foreign policy powers to declare war, to ratify treaties made by the President, to create and maintain an army, to regulate foreign commerce. They also have the ability of called the War Powers Act. Now, it's questionable whether or not this is constitutional, but it's never been challenged. It simply says that if the President uses his power to put troops out in foreign countries and in harm's way, after 60 days, Congress has the power to retrieve those troops if they're unhappy with the President placing them there. Why did Congress pass the act? Well, because they didn't want to be any more conflicts that they didn't vote to declare war on. The President has put us into some pretty difficult situations like the Vietnam War. Non-legislative powers of Congress? Well, if we can't get a majority of the Electoral College votes, the House of Representatives gets to pick the President. They can also impeach and remove the President. You know that's only happened 2 times in the history of the country where a President is impeached. And never has there been a guilty verdict in the Senate to expel a president, because it takes 2/3 of a vote and is very difficult to get. Only 2 presidents have been impeached. That would be Bill Clinton and Andrew Johnson. But they never lost their job. And this is a test question. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is the judge in the Senate during the impeachment, during the trial for conviction. Now, we'll go into the legislative powers in the next part 2 of this, and we'll talk about the lawmaking powers. How do bills become laws? So if you didn't get all of this information, make sure you go back and watch this video again. I know it's long, but it's very important that you really understand all of these pieces of the powers of Congress.